Euro zombies blowing up, then it's going to come right back to Citibank, Bank of America, and the rest of the Wall Street zombies, who, of course, despite what the networks tell you, are not fundamentally stronger than the European banks.
Well, they're not even bailing out Europe.
Thing.
It's now admitted that most of this is actually stuff they did in Europe. They're bailing themselves out.
Yeah, and of course we have, Europe now under Goldman Sachs dictatorship. Draghi, the head of the European Central Bank. Monti, this what can we say, exterminating angel of austerity. And don't forget Papademos of Greece, who's from the Boston Federal Reserve. So I saw an interesting cartoon coming through the Paris airport, coming back from Syria. You have a guy in a jail, right? He's in a jail cell. He's got a newspaper, and it says, Goldman Sachs veterans take power in Europe. And he picks up the phone, and he says, this is Harry Madoff. I'm volunteering to become Prime Minister of Portugal or Spain or Italy. Right? So Madoff, we may be getting to the point where Madoff will be rehabilitated and made head of the European Central Bank or the European Commission or whatever it is. It's basically, it's a world gone mad. So it's time to assert sanity against this stuff, and that means denounce the slide into dictatorship by all means, right? Shock people to awareness. But what you then want them to do is get a mass movement against Wall Street, yes, against finance capital, to shut down the zombie banks and to nationalize the Federal Reserve. That's it in a nutshell.
Now, they're playing a sophisticated game, though, and they'll try all sorts of dirty tricks. You, myself, Dr. Roberts, and others saw the telltale signs of espionage with the former head of the IMF, who they shot down. That's now admitted with Dominique Strauss-Kahn that was a intelligence operation and was staged. They're talking about his comeback. Why did they go after him?
Well, the account that I have is that week, the week that Dominique Strauss-Kahn was entrapped, I guess he was entrapped on a Sunday night, I think. His schedule that night was to fly back to Europe, and he was actually headed for Berlin. And the story goes that there was an attempt by the Europeans back in the springtime when this happened, that Strauss-Kahn was going to go to Berlin and meet with Merkel, and they were going to try to set up the pilot project, sort of the embryonic form of a new world monetary system, which would be alternative to the dollar, maybe a euro-based reserve currency. And, of course, if you want to do that, the first thing you need is oil, so that they actually had an envoy who was scheduled to go from Berlin to Tripoli, Libya, to meet with Gaddafi to see if they could get him to be the initial oil backstop for that. In other words, would he lend his oil reserves and his African following to this kind of an operation? And for some reason, the Anglo-Americans decided, no, we don't want to wait for this. The Europeans might be doing something to save themselves from this attack, right? Because the crisis of the euro is artificial. It is economic warfare. It's a beggar my neighbor policy by the U.S. and the British to make sure that the second phase of the depression hits Europe, because it could just as easily have hit London, which is actually much more bankrupt, right? Britain is a much, much poorer country than France. It's much more bankrupt.
And by the way, that's even admitted. That's even admitted in the British papers. And of course, they'll get to England and us here too. They just want to destroy that first. I mean, the globalists do plan on further destroying us.
Yeah, but there's also the Frankenstein effect. In other words, what the schemers in the city of London and Wall Street, what they think they're going to get is not what they get, right? They thought that Hitler would attack Stalin, and that was all. And instead, Hitler turned out to be trickier than they thought. He turned out to be, indeed, a Frankenstein monster. So once you get into this game of having a depression and you're trying to shove that onto somebody else, then the boomerang effect is going to get you.
Well, I mean, what about poking China and Russia in the nose? That's reckless.
Well, we had, Medvedev was completely sold on the reset, right? He really believed that there was going to be a reset with Obama. Look at Obama. He's got such a nice smiling face. And we had that little
hamburger
button. We had that button. Yeah, we had hamburger diplomacy. We had Medvedev.
Yeah, but come on. Isn't Medvedev a minion of Putin?
Yeah, but maybe not, because if you get the entire world on your side, even in a country like Russia, that gives you real power. So they were Goldman Sachs people whispering in Medvedev's ear, we're going to make you great, dump Putin, we'll make you the lord of half the world. And instead, right now, I think Medvedev is on his way out. I think what's likely to happen now is Putin is going to say, Medvedev, you failed. Your lousy campaign, your lousy policies have lost us 77 seats in the parliament. We're dumping you. We're bringing in somebody else.
Yeah, but let's be honest, Webster. Medvedev was simply a placeholder for Putin and to create the illusion of people changing so Putin could still be in power. I mean, come on.
Look, just case in point, right? Libya. If Putin had been president, this Libya thing could never have happened. It was Medvedev who insisted. He actually said that Russia would join in the attack with, he said, peacekeeping forces. But that meant...
And we have seen a shift in policy, because now Putin and others have said, you attack Syria, we're going to attack you.
Right. And they've got an aircraft carrier, a heavy cruiser with guided missiles. They've got nuclear submarines. Nobody knows how many Russian nuclear submarines there are in the Eastern Mediterranean. I don't want to find out. And you've got similar things going on, I'm sure, with Iran and elsewhere. So there is a change, and there was a substantive divergence. It was more than just...
What do you make of Pakistan and the Iran situation, Webster? And then I want to get into Pearl Harbor briefly.
It documents the insanity of the Anglo-Americans. With Pakistan, you have a country... Pakistan is under a Chinese guarantee, in effect. The Chinese back in the springtime said, China will consider an attack on Pakistan as an attack on China.
And now they've said that again.
It said it again. And... Putin is now personally sponsoring China to become a full member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So there's a double guarantee for Pakistan. But the Anglo-Americans say, hey, we're the imperialists. We rule the world. We're crazy. We do what we want. We're pushing ahead. We're going to try to grab the Pakistani nuclear forces. So again, you've got this belt of territory, right? Because that's what's emerging. Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, where the U.S. is now leaving, right? We're having a Maya Gez moment like 1975 in Saigon. Plus, then after Iraq comes Iran and Pakistan. That's a huge piece of the Earth's surface, which is now pretty much rebelling against the U.S. and the British. And Hillary Clinton is bonkers. Susan Rice is bonkers. Obama, I don't know how bonkers he is. He's certainly mentally disturbed, but he's mainly out there courting adulation as he runs around, from campaign event to campaign event.
He's an egomaniac, narcissist, moron.
Remember, the five people... U.S. is now run by 5 people. That's a secret committee. Committee of Public Safety is Panetta, it's Hillary Clinton, it's Eric Holder, police minister, it's Don Alon of the National Security Council, and General Petraeus. That's the Principals Committee. That's what runs the U.S. Not Obama is sort of a, he's a sideshow with his campaign events and his. He wants to cut the Social Security payroll tax. He wants to destroy Social Security to give himself a short-term boost. Despicable.
All right. Amazing information. We only got about 10 minutes left, and I meant to get to some calls, but we'll have to do it tomorrow on the subject of the 7th anniversary. I mean, we know the Honolulu Advertiser reported a week before they'd be attacked on the morning of December 7th. The Japanese submarines were attacked that morning off the coast. Still, they ordered the stand down. The purple code, the blue code broken. Again, I'm not saying the Imperial Japanese were good, but this is a great example.
No, they were not good. They were really bad. I think that's maybe the starting point, is that Japan, if you take the period between 1890 and 1950, Japan attacked more countries and bigger countries than anybody in the world. They did not have to be provoked to do anything. When they wanted to attack Manchuria, they provoked themselves with the Mukden incident. When they wanted to attack China... No,
very aggressive, very martial. My point is you're writing a book on Pearl Harbor itself, though. Yeah. What's your view?
So here it is. Well, you got to get the historical background.
Go ahead. You can go ahead, then.
The background is what's missing. Let's just do it on 3 levels. First of all, let me premise. If you're interested in the book, Infowars. Sorry, it's I'm getting ahead of myself. It's progressivepress.com. Progressivepress.com. You can pre-order it. Unfortunately, it's going to be a couple of months late concerning the anniversary. So progressivepress.com. Look under coming soon, and then you'll find the Pearl Harbor. There are three groups we got to look at. First is Kimmel, Short, and Block in Hawaii. Right, the commanders on the scene. Why did they blow it? Then we got to go back to Washington. We got to look in the War Department and the Navy Department, and we got to look at the group around Stimson, Marshall, McCloy, Lovett, Bundy. Interesting names. And a guy called Richmond K. Turner at the Navy Department. And then on the codes, we got to look at Sir Winston Churchill, because he's the guy who can read the Japanese Naval Code, JN-25, which the U.S. largely cannot read, or he can read much better. And he is the one who fails. He refuses to warn Roosevelt and the U.S. that the Japanese are coming. But let's take it in order. First of all, the guys on the scene, right? Kimmel and Short. Kimmel for the Navy, Short for the Army, and actually Block is the Naval District commander. They get a warning on November 27th. It says, consider this a war warning. Carry out an appropriate defensive deployment. And they do what? Virtually nothing. Short actually makes it worse. He puts the planes on the runway wingtip to wingtip, and Kimmel says, well, we'll be ready for submarines. That's not what you were supposed to be ready for. You're supposed to be ready for carriers. And they knew this, right? They'd been drilling this since the 1920s. They'd known, and they'd even known what direction the Japanese fleet would have to come from if it wanted to preserve secrecy, not crossing the sea lane. So Kimmel, in particular, who's the most vocal defending himself, he blames everybody but himself. Kimmel, you had submarines, you had destroyers, you had light cruisers with airplanes on them. You had something called seaplane tenders, where you could have 6 or 8 seaplanes operating off something that looked like a freighter. You could have sent all of that out and made a screen. You were told by the Navy Department to send out sampans, yachts, tugs. You were told to send Coast Guard cutters. You had dozens and dozens and dozens of ships. You also had PBY Catalinas. You had B-18 Bolo bombers. They were obsolete, but you could use them for pretty good reconnaissance. Why did Kimmel do nothing? Because it's clear he did nothing. He refused to do any of that. He said, I couldn't have a perfect search, therefore I had no search. And unfortunately, people in the Navy backed him up. I would say the verdict on these people is they're defeatists. They don't want to fight fascism. They don't want the war that's in front of them. They're thinking about some other war, some other time. If you look in American military history, these guys are like George McClellan. They want to train and train and train. And then somebody says, why don't you go and fight? Oh, no, I've got to train and train. And in particular, they remind me of the French generals of the year before, who had a very strong military establishment and were nevertheless rolled over by Hitler because their heart wasn't in it.
Well, that was Vichy infiltration. They were just waiting to have power handed to them. And, of course, you bring up the famous Civil War Northern general who wouldn't fight. But, I mean, yeah, Webster, it's clear that your precious Roosevelt was involved, and him and...
No.
And he was talking to Churchill, and Churchill said he slept a wonderful sleep that night, knowing the U.S. will be brought into the war and all the rest of it.
You got to get into the fine-grained detail. Now, let's look. The problem is, obviously, the people in Pearl Harbor are bunglers. When I started with this, I said they're just garden-variety bunglers, but now I realize they're defeatists. They're people who agree with Lindbergh and with the Chicago Tribune, and they say, let Hitler seize the world. We don't care.
So they're like Neville Chamberlains.
Exactly.
All right, stay there. Let's look at.
But that's only the first.
Let's stay there. Pearl Harbor, 70 years later, with Webster. I love Roosevelt Tarpley. We'll be right back. I'm Alex Jones. All right, Austin Police Chief Art Acevedo has been out there sitting in his car, so we'll see if we can get him in here. Since he's guilty until proven innocent, we're going to have to strip search him like the TSA does. Old ladies, I'm just joking. We're going to get him in here. He's also known as Count Dracula in this area because of all his